Virginia. I'm Paul Taylor here with Cheyenne and Emma, and we are from Goucher College interviewing Saul Goldstein. Do the first interview, part one. Alright, let's see. Guess we can start off. What was your family like?
Oh wait, can we get?
Oh, your name.
My name is Saul Goldstein, S-O-L, G-O-L-D-S-T-E-I-N. That's the name I've used for the past 65 years. Prior to that, my birth name is Albert Solomon Goldstein. And I dropped all that other crap and just used Saul Goldstein when I came out of the Army. All my legal papers, everything says Saul Goldstein, a.k.a. Solomon Goldstein, so also known as, so forth. So that's who I am.
When were you born?
I was born March 17th, 1923. St. Patrick's Day. Goldstein was not our real name, but that's another story. I'm one of 5 children. My father was from Alexandria, Egypt. My mother's from Kovno, Lithuania. They met here in the United States and married, and there are 5 of us. There are 4 of us now, 1 died. My youngest sister passed away 4 years ago.
That's very good.
And so here I am. And we grew up very poor, extremely poor. We had a little store down in an area called Fairfield, which is southern part of Baltimore, down near the docks. And I went to public schools. City College, which was a high school. It was called City College at that time. Still called City College.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah. And I was to graduate in June of 1940, I think it was. And in March, I left and enlisted in the Army.
Do you
I think it, no, yeah, I think it was. I think so. Hey, a lot of years have gone by.
Of course.
But I think that's correct. And I grew up in a very loving family. You want to know about the family. My father was a veteran of World War I, and he was wounded in World War I. And he was in the French Army. He was wounded. Came to the United States and enlisted in the United States Army. Went back to France as mustard gas, lost his eyesight. My father's name is Yet Gaston Hayat. And if you want to translate that into English, it would probably be Isaac Gaston Hyatt. And so when he left home at the age of 13, he dropped the name Hayat. He traveled with a French passport as Isaac Gaston. And when he came to America during World War I, 1917, they said to him, do you all understand French at all? Any of you? They said to him,
Oh, yes.
Comment voulez-vous? What is your name? He said, Isaac Gaston. And they said, vous êtes un juif, are you a Jew? And he said, oui, je suis un juif. And they said to him, en Amérique, c'est pas juif, c'est pas Gaston pour les juifs. In America, the name Gaston is not for Jews. He said, Goldstein, it's Goldstein. He said, c'est bien Goldstein. It's okay, it became Goldstein. And as a child, I used to say to my father, I heard the story, why don't we change our name back to Gaston or to Hayat? And he said, are you ashamed of being a Jew? And I said, no. He said, it stays Goldstein here in America. And that's why the name is Goldstein. Other than my brothers, I have no relative named Goldstein. You see other Goldstein, but not related to me. So that's the story of that. My mom came here in 1913 and settled here in Baltimore. My father and her mother and siblings came in 1922 after World War I being concluded. And so I have an older sister, and then me. My brother was 18 months younger than me, and I had a sister who was younger than him, and then a baby brother, 75. And so the younger sister passed away a few years ago. And we all went to public school, and my younger brother is the only one that went to college and did graduate, by the way.
Your youngest brother?
Excuse me?
Your youngest
My
brother?
youngest brother went to Ball State University, and he graduated. He's the only one that went to college. My other 3 siblings, I think all graduated from high school. I think they did, I'm not sure. I did not. And so, that's
Were you close with your family? I mean, you guys
Yes,
love
very
each
close.
other.
Very close.
Did you go to the same schools as your
Yes.
siblings? Did you all go to college together? Or did,
We didn't go to college. My youngest brother was the only one who went to college.
oh, okay.
The other four of us did not go to college.
Yeah. And you guys are Jewish?
Yes.
Yes. Were there Jewish people in the neighborhood that you guys?
There was two Jewish families in the area in which we lived. Back in those days, in the late 30s, early 40s, this country was a very prejudiced, bigoted country. I used to listen to the radio constantly, and there was a man named Father Coughlin, a Catholic priest, who chanted and ranted the most vehement anti-Semitic stuff you ever want to hear. It was horrible. And we went to school in Curtis Bay, which is the southern part of Baltimore, also an area, and we were one of the only Jews that went there. And we were constantly paraded, we were constantly called Judek, because a lot of the people living there were from Polish parentage, and the word Judek means a Jew. It's a very pejorative term in Polish. And they were called us Christ killers. And many a day my brother and I fought our way back and forth to school. And but we got to be tough because of it. And we managed to make do, but it was a very vicious, the only thing lower than us were black people, and I guess lower than them were the Indians. But there you
All right. What did you guys do for fun when you were younger?
are. As a child,
Yeah.
we'd come home from school and put our books in the house and run out and play ball.
Baseball?
Oh, yeah, we played baseball, we played stickball, soccer, we kick a ball around, anything we do. You know, the first bike I had, I didn't have any tires. I rode it on the frames. And that was my first bike I ever had. And we lived near the docks, as I said, where the shipbuilding went on, and there were farms down there. So we used to, nobody had any money, and so we used to, and the trains would come by and they would carry coal to ship it, you know, and we would jump on a train and we would throw the coal off, and the other guys would take it, put it in bags, and then we'd jump off the train because it was going slow to get to the docks, and we would sell it, 5 cents a bag, something like that. And then we'd go to the farms and we'd steal tomatoes, corn and stuff, and we'd sell that. And so we were quite a bunch.
And was this mostly with your brothers and sisters, or was this like
No, friends. Most of them were black people. I grew up mostly with black people.
Yeah.
Call them, I think, I'm African American today, right? We call them colored.
Depends on who you ask, I think.
I see. Well, I guess one thing I wanted to ask is, with your parents, were they in the house a lot?
Oh, yeah, my dad wasn't. My father was in hospitals to a great deal of my youth because he lost his eyes. So he lost one eye completely, and he had many operations on his eyes because of his gas in World War I.
And how old were you when that happened?
Well, I was born in 23, so I guess I was 10, 12, 14, 15, 16, you know, the whole time I was growing up. We'd go visit him. He was either in Hopkins or Mount Alto Hospital in Washington, or some other hospitals, veterans hospitals, where he was being treated. But I had my mother's brother, my uncle, who used to come and take us and visit my father in the car because we didn't have a car.
And did you know any other family that was nearby, or?
Any other families nearby?
Yeah, or
Oh, yeah.
you know, your uncle or any other
Well, my
relatives?
uncle didn't live near us, so he lived in the city. He lived in very out of the country.
Alright, well, I guess one thing I want to ask, how did it feel being Jewish in America during like the war?
Well, being Jewish was, it was the way I was born, so I had no problem with it, except when people started to make comments and anti-Semitic statements to me, I'd fight and drop the pin. My brother and I would just punch away as long as, you know, I took some good beatings, but I gave some. And you know, I wouldn't tolerate that in a minute. And that's the way I grew up. And when I went in the Army, it was the same thing.
Pretty rough.
Well,
Or it's just the way it
I was
was.
a big guy,
And did, I guess when you went to school, were there other Jewish kids with you? Or?
no, my family, there were maybe 2 families of Jewish kids in the whole school.
Did you get?
What about, was there a Jewish population in Pikesville then?
Oh, probably, I didn't know Pikesville.
Okay, I was just wondering.
Yeah, there probably was. I don't know anything about, you know, as a child on the high holidays, which were just finished, and today is part of Sukkot, which is the holiday of when you sleep and eat in these little huts that they build, reminiscent of the huts that the children of Israel when they came out of Egypt, and then for 40 years in the wilderness had to sleep and live in. So they do that today, 5,000 years later. But as a child, we would all pack up on the holidays. We would close our little store, and we'd go to my grandmother, who was in town. We'd stay with them, my grandma and grandfather, for the holidays. And then we'd go back after the holidays back to where we lived. And I used to go to synagogue with my grandfather there. And then as I got a little older, I would go to a school to learn Hebrew and prepare for my bar mitzvah at the age of 13. And that was in town, so I'd take the streetcar and ride in town to take these classes.
Was it difficult at all trying to go through anything like the Jewish holidays or?
It was very difficult because we tried to observe, and therefore we'd had to walk from Fairfield to the closest synagogue, which meant walking across Hanover Street Bridge, Capsco River. It was a walk of maybe about 8 or 9 miles, or give or take. And my feet always were killing me because we had new shoes. So many times I'd take my shoes off and walk barefoot. But sometimes it was pretty cold. And so, but we made do. We got there, we prayed and did what we had to do, and then walked back home. And sometimes we'd even home at midnight, but the next day started again.
Were you Orthodox growing up or conservative?
I was more Orthodox. Well, let's say a form of Orthodoxy. We didn't eat the non-kosher foods, and we didn't observe the Sabbath because we had to keep store open, but we tried to observe as much as possible. I frankly did not. My brothers and sisters did. I was sort of a maverick, and I, to this day, question religion and so forth. Probably. Anyway,
I guess, what was like the house like? Was your mom in charge? You said she was there, or, I mean, were you guys?
why
just
is all
staying
this
there?
necessary? I told you, we were very poor.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, there was one building, there was a little store, and the back of it was a little kitchen with an egg stove. And so that's where it was, where we lived. My father was able to get 5 cabins, ship cabins. They demolished them down there and brought them up there, put them on blocks, nailed them together. And we lived in there. We had, when the winter time was so cold, my father would take the mattresses and put them on the floor in the kitchen in the other building, and we'd all come, we'd all sleep together, one after the other like that. And and as far as food to eat, we always had food to eat. We found food to eat. I would go down to Lombard Street, which is a section in Baltimore where Jewish merchants were and so forth, and I would go in the butcher and the dairy people and others, and I'd say, and my mother and I speak Yiddish. In those days, these people didn't speak English. And I'd say to them, my mother said, can she have a pound of cheese or 2 pounds of meat or something, and we'll pay you next week deposit. And that's the way we got along. We always paid them, but we had to plead for food because it was tough. And I remember my father came home one day and he was very upset and told my mother something. She started crying. And I said, what happened? What happened? And he told me to shut up and move. And finally, I think I found out. They had $800 saved up in the bank, and the bank went bust. They lost $800. That was like $1 million to them. And I used to go and pay the mortgage when we got out and get at a streetcar and go to the foot of Broadway, which is the mortgage company. And and I would go up there and pay the $8 a month. And that was the mortgage. But it was rough. I remember when I went to high school, I got in a fight the first day I was in high school because I had on a shirt and this collar was frayed and my socks had holes in the heel. And somebody made fun of me and I popped them. And my clothes were always clean, but they may have been raggedy or torn or what have you. But I swore as a child I'd never be poor again. And I'd always have decent clothes and I'd always have food to eat. So, there you go.
I have 3 older brothers. Did you get a bunch of hand-me-downs, or did you
I'm the
hand
oldest, so
down?
there's
Oh, that's right.
nobody to hand down to me. But I'd hand down. But my brothers, my brothers are much. I was 6 feet 2 inches tall. I'm 6 feet now. I'm gravity, you know. So, but my brothers are both much shorter than me. I think one brother's about 5'6" and one's about 5'4", so about 5. My sisters were all very short. My mom was about 4'10". My dad was about 5'6". And so I was a phenomenon.
What was, this might seem like a strange question, but what was like a Friday night in your house? What was that like? I mean,
Friday night we had the candles, and we had a challah, and we have chicken or flanken, which is a piece of meat, for meat. And my mother was the worst cook in the world, but my sisters helped me do a good job. And but my mom could bake. That was a wonderful thing. And every Friday night we would have a dinner and observe the Sip of the Sabbath. I mean, I might go out the next night and eat crabs or something next door or down the street, but Friday was sacred. We observed Friday night.
You guys know what a challah is, right? I was just gonna.
Excuse me?
I was gonna explain, if you would explain what the challah is.
Oh, sorry. Usually on Friday night in a Jewish family that's observant usually, you have a challah. It's a bread that's, when the dough is soft, so they twist it across the top, or they make it round, some make it square, but that's called challah, C-H-A-L-A-H. And it's a bread that was made even in Eastern Europe way back then. They brought it here to America and they still make it. You can go to Giant and buy it every Friday.
And some people think it's like, or some say that the braid represents something.
Yeah.
I don't even remember that. But
It's what I call bubba mices. You know what that means?
I
Grandmother's tales.
can. No, Bubba is, but I don't know what the tails are.
Mice
Like
is
a braid?
Mice is a stories.
Ah.
It's Yiddish.
Did you have any relatives that live near you? You said your grandparents.
Live near me now or as a child?
As a child.
No. They all lived in the city and it was a long way away.
the other families, you said there was about 2 other families in your high
Yeah,
school.
there was another Jewish family, and I think there were 2 Jewish families. But one had children, the other one didn't. And so we sort of played together, but I spent most of my time with black kids. I felt more comfortable. I just spent my time with them.
Would it have anything to do with the poorness of your family? Were the other Jewish families like poor, do you know?
No, they weren't like us. They were a little better financial position. But no, that had nothing to do with it. It's just that I got more out of it. I mean, they were better athletes. They were better, I felt more competitiveness and I enjoyed being with them. And so that was.
Did you play any sports?
Yes.
What,
Played ball. I was in high school. I played football. I played lacrosse, and I played a little basketball. But my brother, the one who was 18 months younger than me, was the real athlete. He was going to word Navy. He was a 128 pound. It's small. He was a boxing champ, and he also, as a kid, was a good athlete, baseball player, and so forth. But we always played sports, unorganized, but sports.
What would you say your favorite food was as a child?
Sorry?
What would you say your favorite food was as a
My
child?
favorite food as a child? Anything I could eat. No, actually, gee, that's hard to say. Well, Mom on Friday night always had a chicken. And, chickens lay eggs, of course, but sometimes the chicken, when we had to take it to someone to kill it, it's called a shochet. And it's a ritual killing. You don't just, in the Jewish faith, if you're observant, you don't just chop the chicken's head off. You take the chicken, you pull the head back, and the sweep of the knife has to kill it immediately. So, but then when you start to clean it and everything, inside the chicken, sometimes there were eggs that had not formed anything, little yellow eggs. Have you ever seen those? Well, I used to sit and pray, and Mom would dispense me, but you got it last week, Rose gets it this week, Mort gets it this week, but that's one of the things. And Mom used to make, it was terrible, I hope you guys ever eat it, something called gribbinus, which is nothing more than a little piece of fat in chicken soup and so forth. Boy, I can feel it around my heart now. But that sort of thing. And as I said, my mom was a baker, and she made something called teglach. When I get to the story of the war, I'll tell you that story. But the teglach are pieces of dough that are put in honey. They're twisted, and they're just about that big, and put in the honey. And you stir the honey, it takes about 3 hours of stirring it, slowly cooking it, slowly put it, and you let it sit. It's delicious. And around this time of year, you make it. One of my nieces has a recipe, I'm going to get her to make it myself.
Sounds delicious.
I'll tell you, when you get to the part about the army, the war, I'll tell you a story about that.
It's Tegla?
It's called teglach.
Tegla.
Do you know how to spell it?
Sorry?
Do you know how to spell it?
Yeah, I spell it T-E-I-G-L-A-C-H-S. That's plural.
So I can go home and make it myself.
But that's a Yiddish term, teglach. In English, I don't know what you call it.
One thing I wanted to ask you, but it's kind of hard to ask.
Ask me anything you want, Paul, no secrets.
What was I just want to know, what was Baltimore like? Cause,
What was Baltimore like?
I'm here now, I know it is.
Where are you from?
I'm from Texas, actually.
What part?
San Antonio.
Oh, my youngest son was in Dallas. And his youngest son.
My grandparents live in Dallas.
Sorry? My youngest grandson is a real Texan. He wears his hat, and he's right now he's the first lieutenant in the Air Force. But observant. He wears a kippah, which is a skull cap, under his cap. He wears tzitzis, which are the prayer strings hanging out. And he's a fighter pilot, and now he's switched to transport planes. Anyway, he's a graduate of Hopkins, and then went straight into the Air Force. Baltimore, what was Baltimore like? Baltimore's always been in between the South and the North. And it has its prejudices. And Baltimore, when I wanted to buy a house when I came home from the war and got married, and I wanted to buy a house in a certain area, I couldn't because I was a Jew. I'm a Jew. And they wouldn't sell to a Jew. There were certain areas over in other parts of Baltimore, the same thing.
What year are you thinking around?
I'm talking about 45, 46,
After
47,
the war.
yeah. And before the war and during the war, it was the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I wasn't looking for a house before when you know. Anyway, and Baltimore's like that. Baltimore was a very homogeneous community too. It was a community, it still is, of neighborhoods. It was a very strong Catholic community. Blacks were treated here like they do in the South. There was a black area, Pennsylvania Avenue, that had great entertainment. And my wife as a child, as a little girl, 8, 9, 10 years old, would walk from her house in one part of Baltimore to her aunt's to visit with her cousins, which was to a complete black area, and never think twice. And nobody'd ever bother anything else. Try today. And it was in that area that I became involved after the war with the black community here, Urban League, the NAACP, and so forth. We formed a group called the Blues, Black Jewish Forum of Baltimore. Okay.
I kind of have to bring up a personal issue just because I'm a girl, you know how I am. What about girls when you were younger?
Oh,
Did you relationships? Were you a huge stud?
yeah.
How are the relationships?
Yeah, I had girlfriends. As I said, I was 12 my age, and I was probably very mature. So I had two girlfriends, and never any problems. One thing I always respected the opposite sex, and I remember once getting in a real fist fight with a good friend of mine because he made a remark about a young lady that I knew. I wasn't dating her, but I knew her. She was a friend, and I just resented the comment he made, and I popped him, and we got into a fight. But I've always, that's what I am. Because my mother and my sisters, I always respected women, and I've never raised my hand. I've seen my father in the worst of times, terrible pain and everything else, when he was hollering at my mother so, but he'd never raise his hand to her, never. And he would, we grew up, and my boys, I have 3 sons, and my boys grew up the same way. When they saw somebody, and I'd say, "This is Mrs. So-and-so, said, how are you, ma'am? Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir." My oldest son's 63. He's still like that.
It's admirable. Definitely.
How old's your youngest son?
Sorry?
How old's your youngest son?
My youngest son is 57. And the middle one is 61. 3 big hunks, gorgeous guys.
What about your kids?
Kids? Well, let's see. The oldest one has a daughter. She's 28. He has 1 child. His wife's from London. The second son has 2 children. His son is 36, married, and has a daughter 12 years old. His daughter is married and has twins, boys, girls. My youngest son has 2 boys. Both of them married. The oldest one has 3 children. The youngest one in the Air Force has 1.
Wow.
It was my family. That's my boys.
Did you meet your wife when you were younger, or
Sorry?
your wife? Did you meet her after
I
the
met
war?
my wife after the war.
Oh,
My
okay.
wife died 4 years ago.
Oh, sorry.
We were married 60 years.
Wow.
It's incredible.
Congratulations.
I'll bring a picture and show you what she looked like.
That'd be cool.
Are there any more
Okay,
questions?
Paul, go on.
What's this? Is there anything that you look forward to, like every week or every day, or was there like anything special, like once a year, or anything?
What do you mean? I don't follow you.
You know, like a Friday night treat or something,
Oh.
or something like you that you look forward to every week that you knew would be
Or
there.
month or year?
Or year. Yeah.
Certain
Well,
holiday or
We
something?
always look through the weekend because no school. And we could watch ball, we could not watch ball. We could go and watch ball, or no television or anything like that. But we could go and watch ball games. And as I said, that was mostly a black community. And there was the old black league, baseball leagues. And they would play, some of the teams would play in that area. And we would go to see them. They were great athletes, great ball players. And why they would never let them play with the white teams, we could never understand. You know, and I always had a problem. I always had a problem trying to understand why, because Aggie, that's one fellow, we call him Aggie. Why do we call him Aggie? Because he had an Aggie head. And we call him Aggie, whatever his real name. But why people looked askance at me when he and I walked together and kids around and so forth, you know. And I could never understand that. And I guess it wasn't until I got in the Army when I realized that they were black and I was white. And I saw, you know, saw the prejudices in the Army the same way.
Yeah, well, so would you say, I mean, if you were hanging out with black people a lot, were they prejudiced against you, like in Baltimore?
Oh yeah, there were times when, you know, we'd get it and they'd say you're white so and so and so and so, you know, and I'd say you niggerish bastard and so forth, you know. The N-word was not then the way it is now, you know. And we would get into it. I didn't win many fights with the black guys.
Yeah.
They were usually bigger and tougher than me, but we toughened me up. We got into it.
It's a lot.
What's like? What do you got there?
Covered everything I had.
Everything you had?
I was gonna just look
Emma?
on some little like details that we might need to get from you that we might have not covered.
I'm gonna start.
Birth was,
My name is Birth
it was
Solomon. Is Albert Solomon Goldstein?
Albert Solomon Goldstein. Okay. That's what I got. Solomon, S-A-U or just S-O-L?
S-O-L-M-O-N, Solomon. King Solomon.
Is this a Jewish name? Solomon?
You know, Solomon's a Hebraic name in the Bible. Most Jewish children are named after biblical figures.
And your family name? I wanna make sure I spelled it right. Probably didn't, but we'll see. I wrote down, or did I write? Okay, Gaston Hyatt, but the first name was
The first name, my father's first name was Isaac.
I-
Isaac.
Isaac, but that's not how you said it.
I said Isaac.
Isaac.
If you were a European or so, it would be Isaac, French.
Isaac, and then.
The middle name was Gaston,
Gaston.
G-A-S-T-O-N.
Okay.
The last name was Hayat, but you would write it Hyatt, H-Y-A-T-T. But in Hebrew, Hayat means a tailor.
Right.
Oh, you know that?
Mhm.
You understand Hebrew?
I, kind of.
Kazak.
Exactly. So should I spell it Hyatt then?
Okay.
Is there anything like that's your favorite memory from childhood? Like, I don't know, I have certain things that stick out more than others.
So you're closer to your childhood.
Yeah.
Favorite thing? Well, I had a teacher I adored, but that was in junior high school.
Why did you adore her?
Because I loved history. She was my history teacher. And she would let me stay after school sometimes and just let me study with her, you know. And many times she'd invite me to her house and I'd go over to her home. She was a widow. We call her not a widow anyhow. We call women never married any.
Single?
Yeah, they were single, but anyway.
I know what you're thinking, but.
Yeah, there's a word for it. And not old maid either. And so I'd go over and sit with her, and she would read certain history books and geography books, and it was just wonderful. I loved her. And as a child, I guess one of the things that really I can always remember was the anti-Semitism that Father Coughlin, still good son of a gun, and I had a little radio, and I could pick up stations, you know, and I heard a station in Hitler, when he first came to power in the early 30s, and listening, I think this is bad news, disgustingly bad. And my mother had a sister, and her family lived in Białystok, Poland, and then we stopped hearing from them, and we know what happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah,
No?
it's still interesting. You know, it's kind of,
Well,
but, I
it
mean,
was, as I say, I was a history student. I loved it, and I was a prolific reader. We had a library in Brooklyn, Maryland, and I used to walk over there, which was about 4 miles, and I would walk over through the railroad tracks and across the fields and stuff. And I think I read every book in that library. And because every night, sometimes my mother would turn the light on, and I'd light a candle or have a flashlight. And I'd read in the middle of the night and so forth. And they'd say, "Where's Sal? He's reading." Yeah. And my nickname, by the way, down there, and all the blacks, everybody, they called me Payme.
Amy.
P-A-Y-M-E. Payme.
Why?
Now, it's a good question. Because my mother always called me in my Yiddish name, in the Yiddish language, would be Shloimi. Shloimi. And so she'd say, Shloimi, and they would hear that and they'd think she was saying, pay me. And interesting, maybe 25, 30 years ago, when children were a little smaller, we were taking some kids to the zoo here in Baltimore, and a garbage truck pulled up. Loaded garbage. One guy turns around and he said, "God damn, that's Payme." He pointed to me and I said, "Oh man, how you doing?" I never recognized who he was, but he remembered me from Fairfield. He remembered me by that name. He never knew my real name. Most of the people down there never knew my real name. And it was Payme. And so There are things like that, just like egg. Yeah. But as I said, I was a prolific reader, and so I was way ahead of my time, myself in certain areas. And then when I never had a car. I didn't have a car. They have to reward my sister on a car I used. We had an old touring car, a Chevrolet touring car. You know, touring cars.
It's the big cars, aren't they?
But it was a convertible like, but it had 4 doors. And the top would come down, the doors were 4 doors, 2 on each side, and you were Chevrolet, and a stick and a spark. You had to get the spark running, and you did that thing moving.
Like a boat,
Huh?
turning it.
Oh, yeah, it was no such thing as hydraulic or brakes or anything like that. You know, the tires were that thick, you know. Fix the tire, you know, 2 of us could lift one side, otherwise somebody took the car off. But it was, we never had colds. But if we got a cold or we got sick or something, out came the bottle of castor oil. That was a cure-all for everything. Teaspoons of castor oil. And X-Lax. And that was a cure-all. And Mom had all these old remedies from Europe. Stuff that she would give us if we didn't feel poorly. And, you know, it was when my uncle would come to visit. It was a great day, and everybody was all excited. He always brought something. And my grandfather was a little man, a little beard, and he only spoke Yiddish. I don't think he ever learned English. And he died, he was 96 years old. And he was a wonderful old man. I loved him. I never knew my father's parents. His father died when he was a year old, and his mother remarried. His father's buried in Port Said in Egypt. His mother, I did go to Egypt twice. And I went to Alexandria, I found my grandmother's grave. But and my cousins, he had a brother and 2 sisters. Their children, they moved to 1955, moved to Cape Town, South Africa. I did visit them a couple of times, and then I said, you got to get the hell out of here. You can't stand this country. During the period of apartheid. So I brought them all to the United States. And they're all in Bethesda, in California, doing fantastically well. Beautiful.
That's awesome.
And so, you know, but I spent my almost 5 years in the military, and I became very involved when I came back with the Jewish community and other community. I swore when I was in Buchenwald that if ever a Jew was in trouble, I'd be there to help. And so I spent 6 weeks in Ethiopia in 1982 getting the Falashel, the black Jews of Ethiopia. And I spent almost 35 years getting refugees out of the Soviet Union. I had 6 trips to the Soviet Union. One time I got off a plane from Finland, from Helsinki. I took 5 steps and KGB, one grabbed this hand, one this hand, put me back on a plane and flew me right back to Helsinki. Another time I got there and he held me stripped naked in a cell, 8 hours, freezing cold. Because I wouldn't tell him where I was going, what I was going to do and everything. And I kept saying, I want to see the American Council, I want to see the American Council. Finally, they gave me my clothes, and that's another story. But I went with Sharon, Admiral Sharon, the Israeli Army in 1898 in Lebanon, all the way up to Beirut. And he came back before the incident happened at Shatili in the other camp. And so I've spent my whole life after the war devoted to Jewish people and Jewish causes. But along the way, that wouldn't work unless I was able to do something for people. So as I say, I was one of the founders of this group called the Blues, Black Jewish Forum in Baltimore. And I'm very involved with one of the beginners of the Christian Jewish Dialogue group here in Baltimore. And so I've been very involved. I was very fortunate to be married to a woman who realized that I had to do what I had to do. And so when I'd say I'm leaving, I went. And children who understood, I think, they understood. I don't know if they were happy about it, but off I went. And that was my life. And then I got too old, I guess. And one day she said, no, you're not going. I was asked to do something, and she said, no, you're 72 years old. That's it. No more. Let somebody else do it. It's okay.
Well, I love this, but I'm gonna drag you back a little bit.
Please.
You said that your uncle used to bring you guys stuff.
Yeah.
What kinds of stuff did he bring you?
Bring us toys, and bring us baseballs and stuff to play sports with. He gave me my first bike with tires. And then he used to always give us $1 a piece or something. You know, we always got $1 a piece. And that went a long way back then. And because you could go to a movie, you get on a streetcar. You know what a streetcar is?
Mhm.
Okay. There's a streetcar museum here. You can take a ride on one.
Yeah, it's cool.
Is that
For a
some-
nickel, you get on a streetcar and go downtown. And for another nickel, you can get a hot dog and a soda. And another nickel, you can go to a movie and
So
see.
they're called Nickelodeons, right?
No, these are regular movies, but you can
Okay.
see 2 feature films, a continuing thing where every week they'd have another chapter, and 2 or 3 cartoons. You could be in there for 3, 4, 5 hours, and then another nickel, and you came home, so for a quarter, you had it made. And so my uncle would come, he'd give us $1 a piece, and then 4 visits to movies, you know, every weekend. So we look forward to that. That was a big deal.
Did the rest of your family have more money than you guys had?
What do you mean, rest of cousins and so forth?
Like your uncle, he
Yeah,
clearly.
he was in better condition. Yeah, he was in better financial shape than we were. See, my father, as I said, was gassed in the war. He couldn't work. My father was an interpreter. My father spoke 13, 14 languages.
Whoa.
But he spoke French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Russian, German, Arabic, 2 or 3 dialects in Arabic and so forth.
That's
So
incredible.
he left home when he was 13. He stowed away on a ship in Alexandria. The ship went to Germany. One of the sailors took him on and said, come on, I have a brother who's a baker. He'll give you a job. So he became a baker's helper at the age of 13. At 15, he said he had enough, and he went to sea as a sailor for 7 years. Then he ended up in India somewhere, and he joined the British Army, and he left there after a year, and he went 1910, 1911, he was in Italy. He joined the Italian army because the Italian-Turkish war started. He was fighting against the Turks. And then after that, I don't know what the hell he did, but then in 1913, World War I broke out. And so he joined the French army because he was traveling using a French passport. And he was wounded there and came to the United States, and then they sent him back as an American soldier. He was gassed and came back here. He met my mother, and he started to open a store. What kind of store? He had his gas mask, he had his army uniform, he had his coats, he had all his army stuff, the stuff he was pretty sharp. He was a pretty shrewd character. And all the stuff he got together, they had an Army-Navy store. And then things went bad. And then he had a wife and 2 children. So he told my mother to take my sister and I, my older sister and I, take all our clothes and everything, go to her mother's. So we got on a streetcar. I don't remember this. My mom told me this story. My sister remembers it. And as we're on a streetcar and we're going, we hear fire engines. He set fire to the store. Collected $2,500 for insurance and started all over again.
Smart. That's really smart.
So, amazing story.
You're kidding when you said it was
I
smart.
saw him once, he always carried a pistol in his belt. My father was about the color of, I'm trying to look to see, not those chairs, but my father was very swarthy, very dark. My brother's 18 months younger than me, he's like complexion, but he's a very swarthy. You'd see him, you'd think he's an Arab or a Latino, but he's very dark. He was very dark. He had jet black hair until he got bald. He had these red eyes, but he lost the one. And he was a powerful man. He wasn't tall, but he was strong as an ox, because I felt his blows. And I remember once he took a gun out in the store, little store we had. A guy came in and made some remark to my mother. and he shot him right in the belly. The guy was wearing a big belt and so forth, and it hit the buckle, glanced off, and then he took the pistol and beat him with the butt of it. And my father was wild man. So that's the way we grew up as kids, you know. My father and I used to clash a lot because I didn't agree with some of the things he did. So, but they called him Frenchie. My father would stand at the door of the store, people walked by, and he always wore a hat, a fedora. And people would come by, tipping, and say, bonjour. My father spoke with a French accent, and he was very gallant and très joli. He was French.
But he was from Egypt?
Yes.
Okay, but he didn't speak. So what was his native language?
The native language, his first language was Greek.
Ah, okay.
Why? Alexandria was a huge seaport. Many Greeks settled there.
Ah.
So Greek was the first language. The second language was French. Third language was English. Fourth language was probably Spanish or whatever. And I used to say to him, when did you speak Arabic? He said, when we had to. And the streets for municipal purposes and stuff like that. But he spoke perfect Arabic, of course, wrote and read it and wrote it. And he also spoke the Arabic that's spoken in Yemen and Aden. You know where those two places are?
No.
Shame on you.
Say, what did you?
Yemen and Aden, do you know where those two places
Yemen?
are? Jordan. Well, Yemen is where now they say the Al-Qaeda is.
Ah.
And it borders on Saudi Arabia. Aden is a little area that's right on the Red Sea, where the Indian Ocean meets the Red Sea. It's right there, and it was controlled by the British for a long time. And the Arabic that's spoken there, and the Arabic that's spoken in Yemen, so is different than that spoken in Egypt. If you were a Saudi, or Jordanian, or Syrian, or so forth, Iraqi, your language would be different. Just like here in the States, you know, you're going down south, you're going to hear people talk a little bit different than we talk because of the way where they live. And they say, boy, you see that hoe over there? Man, don't call my woman a hoe. I ain't talking about your woman. I'm talking about that thing you're going to pick up on the potatoes with. You know, hoe. But, you know, so you have, this is a country of different dialects, and the same with those foreign languages. I know, I mean, I can get by in a few languages, so I understand.
Good. And your dad what was his place of birth? Was it
My
Alexandria?
father was born, now, we don't know. Some say he was born in Alexandria, others say he was born in Montpellier, in southern France, which is near Marseille. So I don't know. I tell people I don't know whether Montpellier or whether it was
Do
that.
you know what year he was born?
Yeah, 1891, I think. 1891.
Wow, that's wow.
And what did your mother do? I guess if your dad
My
was...
mother worked in a store because he was always in hospitals. He was always being treated for his eyes.
Did you guys didn't get any money for him in the war?
No,
Like-
he was getting us so much. You know, if you got $10 a month, it's a lot of money. And maybe got $10, $15 a month.
What was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Sarah. Her maiden name was Miller.
H.
S-A-R-A-H. Miller. I mean, so you can relate to this one. So the sales lady came and got this gorgeous cashmere coat and put it on her. It looked stunning on her. And I said, you like that, Mother? She said, I love it. And I said, give it to her. And she said, I'll pay for it. And she said, see, I told you you would. Didn't I tell you, you know? So, as a matter of fact, she died, and her sister, younger sister, took it. And, but that was my mom. She was great. She was super. She was a real patriot. On 4th of July, she would take all his kids to town, to Baltimore Street, where they had the big parade, and watch the parade. She was quite a lady. But Jeannie was 6 feet tall, and I met her after the war, and she was my therapist, She was my shrink, she was everything. She really, really saved me.